Hello, I'm Lorraine O'Donnell. I work as coordinator researcher at Concordia University for the Quebec English-speaking Communities Research Network. Thank you to Cédric and Shedley for the invitation today. A lot of my introductory material has been covered, I'm happy to say, by my preceding speakers. So a couple of acronyms you'll see on the slides. ESCQ is English-Speaking Communities of Quebec, and collectively they constitute Quebec's official language minority community, or OLMC. Another acronym is the one I'll use a little bit here and there, which is the name of my research network just mentioned. Today I'm going to talk a little bit about Questgren, about a little bit of contextual information. I'm going to give very few stats and very briefly look at 4 research projects that I've been involved in having to do with immigration, which collectively give a good overview of the state of the research in general. Questgren, my research unit, is a joint initiative of 2 institutions, Concordia University, and I was happy to see several people from Concordia here, and also the Canadian Institute for Research on Linguistic Minorities. And my colleague Anna Rabino is here today from Moncton. It was launched in 2009, so over 5 years ago, and if you want more information, you can visit our website. What Questgren does is develop research capacity, and the reason I mention it is because the research that we've done on immigration is always with a view to developing research on a given topic. I'm not an immigration specialist. I'm somebody who is more and more specialized in the study of Quebec's English-speaking communities. Immigration has definitely been identified as a priority topic for the community and its vitality, and so I was invited in on several research projects and developing capacity in that area. Some statistics, I can't even come close to touching on the level of statistics that Brigitte just did. I was happy to see that at least my stats and yours coincide. Briefly, the total population of Quebec is towards 8 million. The official language minority community is approximately 1 million. We have about 1 million immigrants in Quebec. And as of 2006, Brigitte gave more updated stats. We had about 1/3 of a million immigrants who are from the English-speaking community. So the point I want to mention, just as contextual information here, is that the proportion of immigrants within the English-speaking community of Quebec is approximately 1/3, which is considerably higher than the proportion of immigrants either in Quebec's Francophone community, the overall population of Canada, or the French-speaking population outside of Quebec. And this is very relevant to what we find in the research findings and some of the observations I'll be making later. There's also the situation of Quebec's special environment. As you know, especially since we're having a Congress here in Montreal, French is the official language of the province, and also Quebec is responsible for immigration due to various laws that have probably been mentioned in other conferences you've heard so far, notably the Quebec-Canada Accord of 1991. What that means for our particular official language minority community is that where our vitality depends in part as the Anglophone minority on population renewal, working on strategies for population renewal are within this context of Quebec's project to protect French and encourage immigrants to integrate into French-speaking society. So I want to just go quickly over some of the research that's been done through Questgren in collaboration with Questgren over the last several years. In 2010 and 12, it was published in a journal. For Metropolis, I and Anne Robineau and some other colleagues were invited to do a literature review, and we extended that to also do a categorization of settlement services on the literature on English-speaking communities and immigration. And there's some very minute writing there which gives you the reference to those reports and publications. As of 2010, we identified scarce literature on the topic. We reviewed several authors some of whose names I've included here, including Michel Vatzlaroussi, who's here today, some community activists, including Rachel Garber and Rita Legault, and some community-based researchers, such as Francis Ravensbergen. You've also probably heard of Jack Jedwab, who works with the Canadian Association for Canadian Studies. Key findings. We found that the literature told us the following. English community settlement activities benefit the following. They benefit immigrants because the communities serve as a gateway to attract immigrants, which is very much in line with what Mr. Khan just said. We found that immigration settlement activities benefit the English-speaking communities itself because helping immigrants settle increases the number of people associated to communities and as community institutions, and therefore community vitality. But interestingly, we also found the literature showed that settlement activities in the English-speaking communities benefit Quebec's majority Francophone society. And the point I want to make here is this notion that came out in the literature, including, I believe, Michel Vatzlaroussi's, of how immigrant settlement activities undertaken by the OLMC serve as a bridge so that the English community activities actually encourage immigrants to learn the majority language. And it's very explicit and very much an ongoing process where Anglophone groups help new immigrants who have little or no French settle into the majority French population, including by encouraging them and providing pathways to learn French. We also spent a bit of time trying to complexify a little bit this idea of who does settlement activities. Here's a graph where we mentioned main activities are Quebec government, and a little bit in French that is Organismes Communautaires Francophones, but there are also Anglophone organizations as well. And if we look at who those Anglophone organizations are doing this settlement work, which I would like to emphasize, we identified a spectrum of more to less formal. They include ethno-cultural networks, English-speaking or bilingual neighborhood organizations like NDG has some activities here in Montreal, faith-based groups, churches, synagogues, English-speaking community vitality organizations such as Voice of English-Speaking Quebec, and other informal structures. So the conclusions to that literature review and typology led us to make certain suggestions. We recommended that more research be done, particularly on immigrant experiences. But we also talked about global strategies, including communities, groups working with government and among themselves to improve and clarify settlement roles, and also to work with government to include communications so these positive functions are known and promoted. A second smaller bit of research I did myself, again for Metropolis, I was invited in 2011 to comment on some research that Michel Vatzlaroussi and her colleague Georges Libois-Malanga had done. They did a study, perhaps Michel will be giving a follow-up to that, on the social capital concept for immigrant retention and attraction. I did a commentary on their piece. This is French, I took it from their text. Václav and Libois, in talking about Quebec City, for example, they found that the English-speaking community has an important role in attraction of immigrants due to its dynamism, its economic strength, and its linguistic potential as a bilingual community. What I added to that was a new, I believe it's new to the literature, it's a preliminary study, that we can add to our notion of social and cultural capital another notion that's very particular possibly to the English-speaking communities of Quebec, which I called historical capital. My idea is that the English-speaking community heritage of poverty, which I know goes against preconceived notions of Anglophones in many cases, of immigration and the attendant social exclusion may help and have helped English speakers to understand immigrants and help them settle. And I gave some examples of immigrant activities today that clearly draw on a heritage of immigration. In the case of the Irish community here in Montreal, it's a heritage that goes right back to the 1830s, prior to the famine of the 1840s. So that was my little addition to the literature as a historian. I felt that that was something I could contribute. In 2012, Questgren, my research unit, and the Center for Community Organizations hosted a workshop, a one-day workshop, so this is a third bit of research I've been involved in, where we looked at the specific question of immigration and poverty, and we wanted to ask, we weren't doing actual ground research, we were asking the question, what are some research priorities for that topic? Research priorities came out of that day, included factors for poverty, French language training issues, problem with educational attestation, difficulties in the labor market, and many other issues. I'd be happy to send people the report if you would like to see more. In 2014, so just this year, I was involved in developing a project called Building Knowledge About Immigrants and Community Reception within an official language minority context. The goal of that project, which was very short and really meant to develop capacity at a basic level, was to create a team of researchers and to build shared knowledge about the research on immigration and English speakers, and to start a bibliography bringing the literature review up to date. That's a list. I put a lot of detail in here that I know you couldn't absorb today, but it's in the PowerPoint, and if people want names of publications or researchers in the field, you can find it in the PowerPoint, which I understand will be distributed. So we brought together a big group of researchers from 6 universities and also people from community groups who are listed here. The literature review that we did is based on publications and activities of the group itself because time and resources didn't permit a broader study. What I wanted to mention, and on this I can bring my presentation up to a close, what we found was that we still found relatively few studies on the topic of English-speaking communities and immigration per se. However, I remember Michel actually using the term an epistemological effort. When we started studying what the groups did research on as a whole, we found, something that I need to reiterate and that came out in the stats and the other 2 presentations today. When we look at the English-speaking communities, we're talking about a community of communities. And we are looking at communities with a heritage and a history of immigration and a huge number of immigrants even today. So de facto, any study looking at Anglophones in Quebec inevitably touches on immigrant realities. So basically, you cannot study the English-speaking communities of Quebec without one way or another studying immigration. I can't go into more details than that. A couple of final questions. Just to bring up this comparative point that Shedley asked me to do. When we think about Francophone OLMCs, how do Francophone official language minority community settlement activities differ from the English-speaking community goal of bridging immigrants to the broader population? I've been told it's very different. I'd like to know what it is. Regarding the rest of Canada and immigration, I would ask to those of you who study immigration outside of Quebec, do ethnocultural subgroups offer settlement services? If so, do they mobilize this notion I've used of historical capital to provide meaning, motivation, and know-how for their activities? Do community groups offer informal settlement services that need recognition and support? And regarding the English-speaking communities themselves, we need to underline the fact that it's a community of communities making considerable efforts to welcome immigrants, so that support for community groups is equivalent to support for immigrants. And those activities need recognition, a strategy, and support. Thank you.